Hello, my name is Matthew Albright. This is Philozenge. Today I'd like to touch on the philosophy of the self according to Plato. And really, when we talk about the philosophy of the self according to Plato, what we're really going to talk about is Plato's idea of the soul. And before we get to Plato, I just want to touch on the idea, the whole concept of the soul for a moment, and how freaking weird that concept really is. Okay, I think we have the Greeks mostly to thank for our modern concept of the soul. Certainly, the Christians added a layer to it, and then since then we've had many different theologies which have added ideas. But if we look at what Plato was saying about the soul, then I think we've got the core, because it was really Plato, or really the Greeks in general. We'll start with Socrates. We'll give him his due. It's really Socrates and Plato who came up with this idea that there's more to the human being than just this flesh and blood that you see. What Plato and Socrates were saying is that there's a metaphysical, a meta-supra, something beyond the physical aspect of the human self. And so that's where I want to just touch on our idea of the soul today. What I think we should really grapple with is why do we think we have a soul, and what do we think our soul does? If you think about how the idea of the soul permeates our culture, and I think it permeates our culture even beyond its religious aspects. Certainly if you're raised in a culture or in a religion that has the soul tied up to morality, or the soul tied up to an afterlife or salvation, then one can understand that it's an essential part of your belief about the self. But I think our idea of the soul, or really people's belief that they have a soul, permeates our society above and beyond its religious aspects. Think about soulmates. The idea of that it's what falls in love with another person is your souls. Think about how the soul shows up in music, how a soul shows up in even in the justice system. About why a human being has value. And I think it's weird that a society takes so much credence in what is basically a supra or supernatural concept. It's supernatural in the sense that this is beyond the three dimensions of nature. This is beyond what is you can touch, feel, or sense, right? There is no soul that a doctor can take in or out of your brain at any given time. And this is strange for a society that really prides itself on knowledge through science. That there are certainly sectors of our society, if not our whole society, that says, if you want truth about this world, turn to science. Well, on the other hand, if most of us are living with this idea, and that's very important to us, that we have a soul, then it has nothing at all to do with science. Science will not and may never find any proof of a soul. So when you're thinking about soul, when you're thinking about what Plato says about the soul, think about what you think this soul does. That's the other weird thing about souls. A lot of people say, oh yeah, human beings have a soul, if you ask them outright. But when you ask them, so no, what does that soul do? Is the soul like your conscience, the little angel on one side that says, don't do that, that's bad. If that's true, then what's the angel on this side that's saying, oh yeah, you should go ahead and do that. Yeah, rob that 7 to 11. Is this the function of the soul? Is it like a voice in our head that tells us to do right? Or is the soul that which gives us our personalities, right? Or is personality just psychological? Is our soul a gender? Are there male and female souls, depending on what your physical body is? Or is a soul beyond gender? Is a soul beyond personality? Is the soul what you're talking to, or that voice in your head? What do you think the function of the soul is? And especially if you think the soul is important, if your soul is important to your religion or to your culture, or to how you view other human beings. If it's so important, I would try and think through what that soul does on a day-to-day basis. How does the soul emerge in your functioning? All right, set that aside for a bit. I just think it's kind of interesting. Plato. Plato thought there were three parts to the human soul, or let's say there's three parts to the human self. He said the human self, the human soul, is run by reason on the top. Okay. Now this reflects a more general kind of belief with the Greeks, and probably today too, that goodness is based on knowledge. That really, if you want to get anywhere in this world in a kind of improving yourself, then it has to come from knowledge. That reason is the top virtue for the Greeks. So your soul is run by reason, and the soul is connected to morality because it's only through knowledge and thinking about that knowledge, thought the Greeks, thought Plato, that one could become good, that one could act good. And I'll put good in quotes, all right? And we won't try and define it in this course. Take the philosophy to ethics course. So through knowledge, one could become good. Through knowledge, one could also become happy. One could have a happy soul, as Aristotle will get to saying here. And also through knowledge, one could achieve a kind of otherworldly perfection. So you've got reason as the first one, and then the other two parts of the soul for Plato are the spirit element and the appetite element. And if you think about the self in these three categories, it breaks it down rather nicely. All right. Here's the thinking part, the reason. We go through life reasoning. Socrates says, know thyself. If you know thyself, you become a better person, you become good, and you'll become happier. So think about stuff. Appetite over here, or maybe appetite was over here, appetite is that just you've got to take care of the body. You've got to eat. You've got to exercise. You've got to walk. You've got to sleep. You've got to wake up. Maybe you have to work. In other words, this part is feeding the body. Now, appetite left to its own devices might get crazy. It might have too much sex. It might have too much hamburgers. It'll get out of the way because appetite is all about what the body needs. But it might get mixed up with the more pernicious appetites that are so familiar to most of us. All right. And then spirit's an interesting one because spirit is that which takes the orders from reason to hold back appetite. Spirit, another word for spirit, might be will. So we've all been in a situation where we know something to be right, or we know something about ourselves, like, oh, I feel really sick after Big Macs. But our appetite is saying, no, go for the Big Macs. My goodness, they smell good. We have to rely on the spirit, have to rely on our will to carry out the orders from our reason. Hey, don't eat the Big Mac, and pull back on the appetite. Okay? Now, how Plato says you can get to a higher plane, you can become a good person, is if all three of these are working together. That is virtue. Okay? Or in a larger society, that is justice. So, reason thinks things through, gets things done, all right, but doesn't always keep the thinking. Appetite feeds the body so that the body doesn't have to worry about keeping up with the reason. Now, if we were all reasoning all the time and we never ate anything, then we'd be sick as well. Okay? So there's got to be this balance of power. Reason's always on top, but everybody else has got to do their part to carry through. Okay? All right, so there's a very quick and easy, down and dirty idea of Plato's idea of the soul. There's a lot more to it, but kind of flesh out those ideas. Think about first how your own soul functions, and then think about what Plato proposed as the parts and the functions of the soul. Good luck.